Alright, YouTube, I was going to make this video last night, but I was too tired by the time that it was more or less confirmed by more than just the Inquirer that the story it had legs and was plausible. Then I was going to do this earlier, but I ended up getting a bunch of composted manure to dump outside in the garden. Really, it's a nice, wet, warm day, and the next 2 days are going to be nice and sunny and dry. I wanted to get that done so that tomorrow, when I'm certainly going to feel like being outside most of the day, I can work outside. But by now, most of you know there is a scandal involving Ted Cruz and 5 women that he allegedly had affairs with. One is Katrina Pearson, apparently, which is on the Trump team, used to be a Cruz ally. There are other figures within politics, sort of staffers on that list. And it was broken by the National Enquirer. Now, Ted Cruz has come out and flatly denied it, saying, well, sleazy Trump and Roger Stone were the ones that planted the story there. There's no legitimacy to it at all. I would like to point out several things, because I see a lot of Cruz's more diehard fans saying, well, it's the Inquirer, how can you trust them? The first point I'd like to make is that the specific writer for this article was the same person that broke the John Edwards story back about a decade ago. If you don't remember, John Edwards, rising star within the Democratic Party, had sort of a squeaky clean appearance, was sort of like the Rubio of the Democratic Party at the time. He was seen as mild-mannered and smart, generally a family-friendly person. Sort of like he looked a little bit like an evangelist that was just a politician. And he was sleeping around while his wife was undergoing treatment for cancer, and of course it destroyed his political career. Now, this broke with the Inquirer. It was just a gossip story. It was just a sort of sleazy tabloid sex scandal, but it was true. Also, Gary Hart, Tiger Woods, a lot of these scandals, they originate with the Inquirer. They turn out to be true. Now, why I say that this is plausible comes in several flavors. The first thing is that Drew Johnson of the Washington Times, fairly quickly, a few hours after the story first broke, came out and said, yeah, to my knowledge, at least a couple of these cases are true. This is someone from what you would consider within the conservative movement. Washington Times is a conservative magazine, a conservative publication, what you would consider more close to the mainstream within conservatism. So for an accredited journalist from the Washington Times to come out and say independently, yeah, I have some foreknowledge of some of this being true, I don't think that a mainstream journalist would be willing to attest to that unless they had some evidence that that was the case. Simply, I heard a rumor that it was true. Okay, well, if he had heard a rumor that it was true, that's what he would have said. That's not what he said. He said, yeah, to my knowledge, based on what I know, at least 2 of these claims are true. That's the first thing. The second is Breitbart. Now, Blue Libertarian, that's his Twitter handle from Breitbart, back in the middle of February, said that he had a sort of earth-shattering scandal that could destroy the Cruz campaign. And a few days later, he said, well, it's caught up in editorial and sort of there's nothing I can do about it. And the fact that Ben Shapiro and some of these others are really, really heavily in favor of Ted Cruz because he's a Zionist, they worked for Breitbart until recently, they fled Breitbart, but it looks like Ben Shapiro squashed the story editorially, tried to keep it from being released to protect the candidate that he happened to like. Of course, Cruz can't win now, but at the time, Shapiro and others thought, well, Cruz can, he'll supplant Trump, Trump will fall off or something like, or Rubio's support will go to Cruz or whatever, which it didn't. It went mostly to Trump, as I speculated it would. It looks like the story was squashed, and then the Inquirer got a hold of it from Roger Stone. What I think happened is that when Blue Libertarian, again, his Twitter handle, not his actual name, he dug up the dirt originally about one or more of these scandals. And Ben Shapiro and the others at Breitbart figured it was either a legal hot potato and didn't want to touch it because they're considered more of a mainstream conservative publication. Inquirer is more of a tabloid. Either they didn't want to play around with it as a legal case, or Shapiro and others wanted to protect Ted Cruz, or they just couldn't be sure enough to release it, even if they thought it might be true. Apparently, there have been rumors going around for months now that Cruz has had a bunch of affairs. They just didn't want to touch the story. I think that this particular individual then confided in others about it out of frustration about not being able to release what they felt was a newsworthy story. Roger Stone, through his extensive contacts, because Trump has been rubbing elbows with politicians and bankers and the donor class and everyone else for the last, 3 or 4 decades. I think he got wind of it, talked to him himself, said, oh, well, this is great, and then fed it to the Inquirer. Now, I can't imagine that this is completely false. There must be some, at least one or more of these affairs must be reality. Whether it can be proved or not is a completely different issue. There must be truth to it, because there's no fucking possible way that even a tabloid like the Inquirer would put this kind of report out unless it had good fucking reason to. Because when you're dealing with somebody who has a law degree, has hundreds of millions of dollars in donations, and the backing of most of the RNC at this point, you piss them off too badly, and you're probably going to get sued for libel, which means there must be more evidence there. They must be confident that it's actually true. Again, this is the person that broke the John Edwards story. Now, John Edwards did what Ted Cruz did. He came out at first, said, well, there's no truth to it at all. And the alleged mistress, like Pearson has, and she's working for Trump now, came out and said there's no truth to it. Trump, meanwhile, has come out and said, well, I don't know if it's true or not. I hope not, and that's his issue. I think Trump is fairly well aware of the rumors. By the way, I don't think he had anything specifically. I think Roger Stone may have gone rogue on this one. Might amuse Trump slightly. He would be stupid to get involved, because then Ted Cruz is coming out saying Sleazy Donald and Sleazy Donald's campaign manager gave this to the Inquirer. Well, that can't possibly be true, because the story apparently was suggested many months ago by Breitbart, was suppressed by Ben Shapiro or somebody else within the organization. And that has nothing to do, I mean, Breitbart's more on Ted Cruz's side. That has nothing to do with the Trump campaign. The Trump campaign obviously got wind of it, but they're not the ones that manufactured the story, probably because it's not a manufactured story. I have a feeling it's probably more or less true. Again, whether they can actually give further evidence of that remains to be seen. Sometimes it doesn't happen, but again, John Edwards, Gary Hart, Tiger Woods, sometimes the scandals turn out to be true. Now, if Ted slept on the side with 5 different women, then you have 5 different opportunities for any of these individuals to come forth and say, yeah, you know, I fucked Ted Cruz. A lot of people's reaction is actually very funny. They're not even so concerned about that. They're more like, ew, Ted Cruz having sex. That's something I don't want to think about. I can concur and sympathize with that and emphasize deeply. I don't want to think about it either, because he's fucking grotesque as fuck. He's got this weird puffy face and just completely misshapen. He looks like a sack of shit to me. But at the same time, some people have pointed out, well, Trump's had affairs. Of course he has. It's already been aired out many years ago. The difference is Donald Trump is not casting himself as the street preacher evangelical candidate. He talks about Jesus sometimes. Everyone knows that's a fucking stunt that he's pulling. Everyone knows he's not particularly religious. He's not from the middle of the cornfields of Kansas. He's from New York City. He's a mogul. He's a tycoon. He's a businessman. He doesn't really have time for that stuff. Cruz, on the other hand, while actually being sort of the rich, blue-blooded Goldman Sachs choice for candidate, casts himself as, well, yeah, I'm some hayseed from out in the fields of Texas, roping cattle, and I totally wasn't born in Canada and thus am ineligible. And by the way, I love Jesus more than everybody else in the race. I love Jesus as much more than Rick Santorum did. That's the problem. I don't, if a person is having an affair, that's ultimately their moral responsibility to deal with. That alone doesn't really have anything to do with me, including within the realm of politics. The only real risk you run with that, now Clinton slept around, JFK slept around, Andrew Jackson slept, or everyone slept around within U.S. politics. You get into a position of power, people are tempted by your standing to sleep with you, and oftentimes the individual is not strong enough to resist this. Some of them probably are, most of them aren't. That's just sort of the way, Obama's probably slept with people, Bush probably slept with people. It's just sort of what happens within D.C. There's a lot of intrigue that goes on. But do you ultimately want someone who can't keep, not just one affair, but 5 affairs? Do you honestly want somebody like that to potentially be around foreign dignitaries? They're supposed to be sort of non-biased and America first within negotiations and stuff like that. What if some female head of state is really hot and they just, fall right into the trap, and then it starts an international scandal? That's the only real risk that you run. It doesn't ultimately bother me too much because, it's his problem to deal with, I guess, if he can't keep it in his pants. But it is a little odd. This isn't a case where somebody like Clinton, when the Clinton affair broke, everyone knew he was a playboy, but the specific affair that was broken involving Lewinsky was basically, well, he fucked an intern. It's not 4 or 5 people, it's one intern. He can claim, well, it was a moment of weakness, or I only got a blowjob, or, we didn't have sex, we flirted, or, we did this and that and the other thing, but we didn't actually bang, or something like that. That's how he got away with it. But Clinton probably would have been removed from office no matter how good the economy was going at the time if somebody had come forward and said, oh, yeah, well, he slept with 5 women in the last few years while he's been in office. That would have tipped the scales, I think, in the public's mind. 1 affair, people didn't really care. 5 affairs would have been a little bit different. And when you're the evangelical candidate, Hillary's not an evangelical. Sanders is irreligious. Trump pretends to be religious. Most people understand he's not. Kasich is sort of center conservative, I guess. Cruz is the only one there that's still an evangelical. He represents sort of the political party of Jesus is my vice president. So if he is having affairs, it affects him a lot more than it would somebody who is a big business mogul centrist, or somebody who, has been mostly a state level, governor like Kasich, or somebody like Hillary. There are all sorts of rumors that she's, munching Huma Abedin's carpet. Ultimately, at the end of the day, people really care? No, because most of her fans don't think that that's a problem. Ted Cruz is a different story. Most of his support comes from evangelicals. It's heavily in the heartland. They don't necessarily like the thought of that as much. They'll forgive a pastor, like Ted Haggart. Ted Haggart was smoking crack and fucking transvestite ladyboys. And it almost destroyed his career, but he went back to preaching and stuff. Claimed, oh, I'm not actually a homosexual, these are ladyboys, not actual men, or some weird stuff like that, and came out talking about that. So, oh, but I'm better now, I don't sleep with prostitutes anymore, and they kind of forgave him. He didn't have his original congregation, but he's still a preacher. Time will tell how this affects Ted Cruz. But I have to say, in all probability, it's certainly plausible. I think there's probably some truth to this. Because, again, Drew Johnson comes out. You've got the shit with Breitbart, which predates the actual release of this story by over a month. It was back in February that they said, wow, we got campaign-ending information on Ted Cruz, and all of a sudden he shuts up about it and doesn't mention it again. And then right after it breaks from the Inquirer, he says, man, I hate getting scooped. Well, that's an admission. That's the story that they were going to run on Breitbart. Not the National Enquirer, a conservative publication that generally people that support somebody like Ted Cruz take it very seriously. Somebody from, some Nancy Pelosi probably doesn't take Breitbart seriously and doesn't care what they have to say, but most of the Republican core does. They actually care. They love Ben Shapiro because he happens to be about the most Zionistic individual within the Republican Party. These people have gone out of their way to protect Ted Cruz, and Shapiro, of course, is putting up plausible deniability now, saying, oh, well, I don't think it's true, but if it is, I'd be the first person to call out Ted Cruz for it. Oh, God, I hope it's not true. It probably is. One of you would know if it was true. You've obviously discussed the issue with somebody who works at Breitbart. Why aren't you talking about it? and it's on Drudge, and Michael Savage picked it up, and everyone, Scott Adams was talking about it. Yeah, there's probably some truth to it. Apparently, the rumors go back far beyond Breitbart and are mysteriously referred to as The Thing, and have been for some months. So it'll be interesting if anyone comes forward with any more specific information, or if somebody who has been named here, or not named by the Inquirer article, but the images have been actually associated with stock images, essentially, of at least 3 of the people involved are known. Katrina Pearson, I can't remember, something Carpenter, I believe, was another one, and then there was a third with the last name Flores. And so at least 3 of these people are known from the pictures in the Inquirer magazine. Cruz complaining about Roger Stone, my goodness. This goes back to February with Breitbart, and probably long before that. Inquirer didn't simply make this up out of thin air. There was somebody gave them the story that had already been proposed and conglomerated together from somewhere else over a month before. That's not the Inquirer simply making up alien baby story or Nazis under Antarctica stories. By the way, the Inquirer used to be much more of a tabloid than it is now. It's actually a little bit more honest and a little bit less untrustworthy now than it was in the days of old. But I mean, go back to the 80s. That's when you're talking about Gary Hart. John Edwards, that's the middle of the 2000s. Tiger Woods, that's quite a few years ago. In the time since then, they've actually gotten a little bit more credibility. And for the person involved with the John Edwards expose that utterly destroyed his career to be the one breaking this story, I think gives it at least a little bit of extra weight. So Ted Cruz can deny it, but then again, whether he did cheat on his wife or not, he was automatically going to do that. If he did do it, if he did have an affair or 5 affairs or whatever, he's hoping nobody has any specific proof that that's the case and that the people that he had affairs with won't speak about it. If he didn't have an affair, then of course he's going to deny it as well because he didn't have an affair. So we'll wait and see. If Trump is involved, then he probably has an ace up his sleeve, and he's going to get Pearson or somebody else to talk about it in the next few days. He'll let it stew for a day or 2, let it get out there in the public, let Ted Cruz address it and deny it, so that he can also not just be a pervert but also be a liar when he then exposes that it's actually true. That's the way that it works. When you're dealing with somebody like Trump, Cruz has come out and denied it, said sleazy Donald, sleazy Donald. That's a good way, if Trump does indeed have evidence that this is true in any way, shape, or form. That's the exact opposite of the response that you want to use. You want to deny it and then not say another fucking word and pretend that it doesn't exist. But unfortunately, Trump seems to have planned long-term and baited Cruz and many others with the KKK thing, because what's one of the most common things people are saying now? Well, Cruz needs to disavow it a dozen more times and keep addressing it because, KKK, because reasons. It almost looks like a long-term setup, like Trump's actually known about this for a long time, kept Ted Cruz in the race and didn't destroy him specifically to get rid of people like Jeb and Rubio first, because Cruz could compete for votes that they would have to compete for and couldn't get. If so, then that's a brilliant long-term strategy. It's very, very cruel to your opponents, but it certainly is effective, obviously worked. But we'll see. We have to wait a day or 2, I suspect, before you'd get anyone talking about this in more detail. Either somebody who's been named or their image was put into the article to begin with, or whether Trump will have a response, or whether the Inquirer has more evidence, or whether Blue Libertarian has other stuff that he's going to feed out through Twitter. We have to wait and see. It could be breaking right now as I make this video. I'm not on Twitter right now, but things, when you're dealing with editors and you're dealing with the potential lawsuits that are involved with slander and libel, things move a little bit more slowly. So give it a few days and we'll know sort of where it stands and whether this is part of a plan to actually destroy Ted Cruz. And make no mistake, if he did have affairs, it's going to destroy him. His campaign he'll be Herman Cain, essentially. Herman Cain's run for the presidency in 2012 was destroyed by multiple allegations of sexual misconduct. well, multiple allegations of affairs is a half step below that. You know, Herman Cain was blamed for assaulting people, you know, unwanted advances. These were apparently not coercive, they were consensual. But for the evangelicals, those are basically the fucking same thing, so we'll see what happens. That's about all. Peace out.